Hello, today I'm going to talk about boundaries, what they are, why they're important in our lives, and how to maintain them. So I'm going to focus today on personal boundaries and boundaries in personal relationships rather than professional boundaries. And these boundaries are something that start to develop when we're very tiny. So as babies, we don't really have a sense of separateness from ourselves and another person. So often that's our mothers that we're in very close contact with when we're tiny, when we're feeding, whether we're breastfed, whether we're bottle fed. But we are, for those first few weeks of life and months of life, it's almost like we're not a separate person. And then as you observe small children, we obviously can't remember this in our own lives, but as you observe small children developing, you start to notice that sense of separateness. So the baby will cry when the mother or the person who's with it most of the time will go out of the room. The baby will start to get stressed and show symptoms of signs of stress and anxiety when the mother isn't present and wondering where the mother is. You also notice this with small babies when they're playing with toys, and at a certain stage of development, once they've dropped something or it's gone out of their field of vision, they will look for it, whereas previously they'll drop it and they won't pay any more attention to it, it's gone. So that sense of boundary and that sense of us being separate or connected to another person, other people, is something that is developing in stages from being very tiny. Boundaries in relationships, again, if we're growing up in a family with our parents, it's really the parents, our parents, who set the boundaries of what we can do, what we're able to do, what is acceptable in that family, in that tribe, in that culture, and what is unacceptable. So again, as we're growing and our parents are saying no, don't touch that, don't do that, and hopefully explaining why and the reasons why, then we start to realise that there are reasons for those boundaries which may be around safety, especially as small children. You know, if you touch the cooker when it's on, or the fire when it's on, or something hot on the stove, then you're going to get burnt. And sometimes we learn that through experience. But those boundaries of behaviour and what is acceptable and what is unacceptable will be largely set by our parents in those early years. And it's the first 2 years which are really important in terms of that development. And if you grow up in a family where there are firm boundaries in place which enable you to explore and express yourself in the world, but also at the same time to feel safe, then you're going to be able to move out into the world from a much more secure place. If you lived in a household where maybe your parent was unwell, or where there wasn't a routine, where things were maybe a bit more chaotic or dysfunctional, where people were in and out of the house all the time, where the boundaries were quite lax on who was there, who wasn't there, who was looking after you, who wasn't looking after you, then you start to learn different things about boundaries, and also to maybe feel a sense of insecurity of when there is a boundary in place or not, or the fact that there never really were any boundaries. Perhaps you didn't have, times when it was expected that you would go to bed, times that it was expected when you would get up in the morning, things that you did when you got home from school at the end of the day or at the weekend. So it's sometimes helpful to have a little think about the family that you grew up in, what your childhood was like, and the experiences that you had around boundaries and boundary setting, and what examples were shown to you as a child by your parents, without any kind of judgment, just as a way of understanding your attitude and your response and your approach to boundaries and boundary setting now. As we grow and as we become adults, and even as younger children, once, say, you pass primary school and you're starting to see friends out of school and at the weekends, it's really helpful to have an awareness of boundaries and what feels okay for you. You know, how long you want to spend at a person's house, what time you would like to come home, and what to do, what feels comfortable for you, and also what is right and feels comfortable for your parents too when you're quite young. Then as we grow older, we start to be fully responsible and take control of those boundaries and boundary settings ourselves. And that's when it is really important to know what are the boundaries which feel comfortable for you in terms of what information you disclose to people about yourself, how much you tell people when you meet somebody, what time you want to meet, what time you want to leave, where you meet, whether that feels comfortable, and always sort of checking in with yourself. If you don't have a sense of boundaries, and you haven't had that structure as a young person, it can be very easy to just be engulfed by people who want your time, who want your attention, and maybe want a piece of you without even realising that that's what's happening. And one of the things I once heard said is, you know, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for everything. And I think that for me sort of sums up what it means to have personal boundaries, to know what feels comfortable for you, and to put those boundaries in place. And the final part, I suppose, of that is around maintaining the boundaries and how to do that when people push your boundaries. So say, for example, if you have a friend who is somebody who's always wanting your attention, perhaps they're quite emotionally needy, and where to put the limits on that. If they're ringing you, if they're wanting to meet up with you, and you know you have that heart sink feeling when they contact you, you get a text message through, you think, oh, I don't really want to do that, but they're saying, I really need to see you, I need to see you now. You know, what do you do with that? And I think it's important to recognise what comes up in you as a feeling, what is your instinctive response to that, and to pay attention to that, so that you're not giving more of yourself away than feels comfortable. There's a fine line between supporting a friend and actually allowing yourself to be washed away on the tide of their drama, their latest drama and emotions. And I'm sure we've all had that experience with somebody, only to find that, you know, 2 hours later, when we're feeling pretty exhausted, that they're fine and off again with their lives and onto the next person that they can offload onto. So it's important to recognise, you know, the patterns not only in ourselves but also in other people, and their patterns of seeking, wanting, needing attention, and how they seek to satisfy those and self-soothe, or their inability to self-soothe, which is maybe why they're seeking out our attention in the first place, and to begin to have a more expansive awareness of that. So that's a little bit about boundaries, what they are, how they develop, why they're important in terms of our health and well-being, and also how to maintain them once people are starting to push those boundaries. And as I said, we talked about boundaries in personal relationships today, so it may also be quite good to do another session on boundaries at work, which is another whole area altogether. And we can, you know, we may find it much easier to set boundaries and maintain boundaries in personal relationships than at work, or vice versa. And again, that all depends on our experiences and what we've learned along the way. So thank you for being with me today. And you can check me out on Facebook at Self Development Leicester, where I post most days. Please subscribe to the channel if you've enjoyed this film, and maybe share it with other people if you found it helpful. It's also great to get any comments, so you can leave comments in the comments box. Thank you. Have a great day and good health.